Okay, it's the weekend again. It's raining. It's actually been raining for quite a few days, but I'm out in the shed again and working on various things. So I've been working on the KT250. It's coming together nicely. I still haven't figured out why there's no headlights. I suspect the stator winding for the headlights is gone. But in order to look at that, you have to take the cover off and get the flywheel off. So I'm not going to bother for now. I'm just going to put it back together as it is, and if it doesn't have lights, that's fine. I did get my tyre levers, that's these, and I was able to use those to fit the tyres, which you can see I've done here. And I'm just going ahead and refitting the bearings. So I did buy new bearings for these, but I didn't get new oil seals, so I've had to order those. But this is just showing how I fit the bearings using a piece of threaded rod and various sockets and washers to make sure I pull them in straight. It's very important. So I have my parts diagram. Don't forget to fit the little spacer tube. That's very important because that's between the bearings, but I have that in place. Luckily this is M12 rod, which is the same diameter as the axle. So I have ordered these little oil seals. Hopefully they'll turn up next week, and then I'll be able to finish the wheels and remount those, get those back on the bike. So I'm just going to fit these, and then I'm going to do a bit of a cleanup because everything's got messy again, and then start doing some work on the Riley, I hope. Yeah, looks like I'm going to be stuck in here all day. That's not a bad thing. Oh, I'm not sure if we can see it as well, but you might notice the Land Rover out there with a blue tarpaulin over it. Turns out I haven't fixed all the leaks. The other day when it rained continually all day, basically, I went to move it and it was full of water again. And I've come to the conclusion it's just bad design. So the sunroofs, the drains are all clear. The rubber seals are pretty good, but just the nature of them, they do let water in. And the drip tray around the sunroof and those drain tubes is meant to be able to drain the water away. But if there's too much water, it just spills over inside. So I'm going back to plan A, which was basically cover over the sunroofs with clear vinyl. I never use them. I'll remove the handles. That should seal it up completely. So obviously I can't do that today. I have to wait till it stops raining. But I've got the vinyl ready to go. It's stopped raining finally, and the sun's come out. So I'm just kind of working on little bits and pieces at the moment. I wanted to try and get quite a bit done on the little motorcycle. So you can see I've got the wheels mounted. They're just temporarily in place. The pin goes through the bearings, but I haven't actually done the brakes or the rear sprocket. So for the rear sprocket, I need to make some new block washers like these. These are just 0.8 steel. Ideally you'd get them sort of water jet cut or laser cut. I think I'll just make a set by hand. It's just going to be a hell of a lot cheaper. I don't know that there's anywhere in New Zealand that'll really do little jobs like this with laser cutting and water jet cutting. There are places that do it, but they're all, you kind of have to send it off for a quote, and it's not cheap getting stuff like that done. So, you know, a one-off like this, I'll just make them by hand. And then I can, there's no dust seals in the rear wheel, so I can get the sprocket on there, and I can get the brake mechanism on this side. I've refitted the fuel tank. I haven't hooked up the fuel line yet because I may need to take it off again, and it's quite fiddly getting the fuel lines on and off. I did put on the front wheel, again it's missing its brakes, and I discovered there was a whole bracket that was still attached to the brake cable that I needed to clean up and paint. So I've just spray painted that, I'll put it in my little oven to bake the paint on. That's a little bracket that goes over this side, and this is the cable that operates the front brake. But I need the dust shield that goes in there, the little oil seals. There's a few of them on the front. Pretty sure there wasn't one on the back. Hopefully not, because I've already made that order. We can just check. So this is the parts book. This is what I've been using. So this is the front. There's the seal. This is the rear. Number 7. There is an oil seal there. So I may end up having to reuse one then, because I think I have forgotten to order that one. No, I didn't. There are 3 oil seals that I need. There's this one here, there's the one on the back, and there is this one here which goes in the speedo drive. So I have ordered it. I have to wait for that as well. But Zelda. Once those arrive, I can actually finish up the front wheels. When I mounted the tyres, I did end up using soapy water to mount them. The silicone grease would have worked, but I realised the problem with that is it'll probably never dry. And with the tyres, you want whatever lubricant you use to dry up so that the tyre actually sticks to the rim, or isn't going to slip off the rim, I guess. These are, because it's a trials bike, it has got the little bead lock things. So it's got the rubber things in there that you bolt up, and it's actually clamping the bead off the tyre from the inside, pulling it in place. The other thing that was a bit hard to figure out was what pressure to put in them. So the pressure in the manual is only 5 psi, which is really low. These tyres, these are Shinko tyres, will go up to 33 psi. So I kind of did a bit of looking around, and people talk about, when they're not doing the trials riding, they have them a bit higher. So I've actually got 15 in them, which seemed about right. The wiring is out of the way. I'm waiting for the brake switch on the other side. So there's a couple of loose connectors there, but for now I've just taped those up. So yeah, once I get the oil seals, I should be able to start finishing this thing up. The other problem I've got is the side covers. So I had one original for the other side, and when I got the bike, the guy said it came with some spare parts, including the other side cover. Unfortunately, he gave me the one that's the same side as the one I've already got. So I've got 2 right-hand side covers. That's these. So this is the reproduction one. These nicely machined pieces. And what they do is there are rubber grommets that go into these holes, and then this would fit on there like that. I was wondering about making some out of aluminium. I've got thin aluminium sheet, and could probably hammer the edges around and make something suitable, paint it green. Should look okay. This is the original one. One of the lugs is broken off up here, which would be repairable, I think. So I do still need to sort that out. I may ring the chap and see if he's got the other side covers, and then use the 2 new ones, I think. Then I can keep the original one original. I don't have to try and repair it and ruin it anymore. I think the other thing I'm missing is, when I got the bike, it didn't have the front mudguard at all. All of this had been cut off. So the remains of these were on there, but they'd been angle ground, with a cut-off disc cut off through there. So these are new ones. They're stainless steel. They're quite nice. But I think I also need the brackets that go over the top that the mudguard actually bolts to. There's another bracket that goes inside there, but I might be able to make that. And there's a little wire clip thing that goes in there which holds the front brake cable. So the bike's coming along, and I've been working on the Riley. I'm still trying to figure out the guards and where the guards go, and where the guard stays go. That's the most important thing. So I've just kind of mocked it up for now. The other thing I did is mocked up the headlights, as you can see, which really makes the car look like a car. It's quite amazing how, I guess it's like that face thing where cars have faces. So without the headlights, they look a bit wrong. It just kind of makes the car look like a character with the headlights there, the lamps. I've just made temporary little wooden blocks to figure out where those are going to mount. So the trick with mounting these is they need to be out of the way of the bonnet, so you don't whack the back of them. The positioning, I can play with that a little bit. I did realise the brackets have to be quite beefy because there's a lot of weight there and they'll wobble around. But these headlamps aren't really adjustable. So, I mean, side to side is easy to adjust. You just rotate them. But getting the up and down is going to be interesting. And I think the only way I'm going to be able to do that is actually bend the brackets. There's no easy way to make a ball mount or a flexible mount, or more modern headlamps have, when I say more modern, even the Austin 7 type ones, the clamp bolt is often quite sort of loose, and it's in a sort of cup arrangement. So you tighten it up and you can move the headlamp body. But these are just solid mounted. They just go straight down. It's just a solid mount there. So I'll have to figure that out in order to get the headlamps pointing in the right direction so I can get it on the road. But the good thing is, because it's all solid mounted, once they're mounted, they're not going to change. And I mentioned before, these are original Riley guards. They're the ones that were on the car that my friend Joss helped restore. They've been well messed around with. They give me some idea of the shape of the actual Riley ones. So it gives me really good dimensions for the width, the curvature, how deep the sides are, how this little kick up on the front works, things like that. So these will be really good for patterns for making the proper ones. What I'm trying to figure out at the moment is how high they need to sit above the wheels and where the guard stays will go. So the front, there's a stay at the top and it goes down on a diagonal, and I need to make a plate that bolts to the chassis, and it's got a short section of tube welded to it. And the guard stay actually fits into that. There's a hole through that mount, and the bottom of the guard stay is threaded, so it drops down into it, and there's a big nut on the bottom, and that's how they bolt the front guards on. And then the rear mount depends on what style of guard you've got. If you've got these cycle or these short type ones, or if you've got the long, more road version of the car, the more touring version of the car, in which case there's another mount at the back somewhere. And the rear ones, because my body isn't a copy of an original and there are no blueprints, it's a little bit different. So I need to make what works for me. But as it happens, I can put the top mount on top of this rail, and that puts it in a nice position. So you really want these to be as straight as possible. They were hollow tube originally, 3/4 inch diameter. They need to be fairly thick walled, I think. And there's kind of you have like a flat strap that goes inside the guard. So the guard sits on top of it, and there are usually coach type bolts that go through to bolt it on. So I want this one to be directly above the axle. So that's about the right place there. That's kind of my mock-up. It's about the right height for having an end that sort of hooks up and over. And then there's another mount at the front and another one at the rear. I'm still figuring those out. The trick with the front one is I also need to fit some brackets and some blocks of wood that sort of go in there, and that's what the seat back fits against. And the seat back is just effectively a flat piece of plywood, but it needs quite a bit of bracing around it. It's got a semicircular cutout at the bottom there for the torque tube, and it needs to be very solid because, of course, this is an old car. There's no power brakes or anything like that. So when you need to brake, you need to really push on the brake pedal. So you need something to push back against. So that needs to be nice and solid. Eventually, when the body is done, there's kind of a combing piece that goes all the way around here, sort of a little padded piece. And there isn't really anything that holds the seat back in, as far as I know. It just kind of pushes in there. It's like a friction fit, as far as I know. I'm also looking at where I'm going to run the cabling and the fuel lines, and I want those to run along the chassis rails so that they're not attached to the body, so you can remove the body. So I've got a couple of things I need to mount to get those. That's my lower radiator hose which turned up, so I can actually finish the cooling system now. But I still need to get some angle iron. There's diagonal braces that go from here back to the chassis, and on this side there's a little sort of tray, a little platform, and this is where the battery lives. So the battery cables, one will go to the chassis for the earth, and the other cable will come up along inside the chassis rail. So it's very handy that you can get inside the chassis rails on this car. I also need to mount this somewhere. This is my battery master switch. Ideally it would be sort of here somewhere, but you have to think, well, where does it need to go so I can actually get to it without having to pull half the car apart, but still have it mounted somewhere sensible. So that may possibly go in here. I also need to consider the front of the seats, so I may need another smaller cross member that goes across just to give me somewhere where the front of the seats mount. And I have seen a car where it's mounted sort of near the seat somewhere, or under the front seat, somewhere that you can actually get to. The other thing I want to mount is this, which is a starter solenoid. This is a little bit out of period. Apparently the early cars, I don't think the Brooklands originally had them. I'm not sure what they had then. I don't know how they did that. But I've just noticed Zelda, come here. Why have you got sawdust all over you? Silly dog. But it seems like the later cars, later Rileys did have them, and I've seen several, what I'm assuming are original ones, where there's an extra bracket that goes on here, and this mounts here. So that's what I'm going to do as well, just because it keeps it nice and neat. I can have a very short little link between the contact here and the starter motor. The firewall does come right in up here, so it will be tight to get into the button, but you should just be able to get a finger in there if you want to press the button. The button is there so that you can start the engine from inside the engine bay, which is handy. I think the firewall, I don't think it'll come all the way back to the starter motor here. It'll be in here somewhere, I think. That'll be about where the firewall goes. So there is just room. So I have made a little bracket for that. That was what that ding was before. That's sitting in my little toaster oven. So still a bit warm. So little brackets and things like this, I use that engine paint, and then I just bake the paint on about 75 degrees and leave it for an hour or so, and that works really well. The paint just bakes on. But that's just a nice little bracket that'll fit the starter solenoid. So the other one I need to figure out is the fuel line, which will have to come up the other side and run inside the chassis rail, and probably have to terminate down here somewhere, because the fuel pump lives up here. It's an SU fuel pump that will be on the body. So on the firewall. So that'll have to be able to be disconnected from the car. So there'll be probably a flexible line coming down, and then there's another connection here which goes to the carburetors. So that'll all be able to be removed. The things like the water temperature probe you would remove from the radiator, and the tachometer, and then I'm going to try and keep the wiring to a minimum, and there'll be a connector hidden somewhere so that you can disconnect all the wiring from the body from the engine. That's the plan so far. So one of the problems on these cars apparently is the guard stays can crack because there's so much vibration on these wings. So what some people do is fit diagonal braces, but that's very difficult to do because you've got the headlamps in the way, and I'll have to try and figure out if there's any way I can actually brace them down to the chassis somehow. But that's kind of what I've been working on today. So it's the next day. I ended up making a new bracket for the starter motor, starter solenoid. I wasn't happy with the first one because I got the holes slightly off, and you had to sort of squeeze it a bit to get it to drop on, and I just wasn't happy with that, so I made a second one that just drops straight on. It's nice and easy. And what I need to do now is make the link that goes from here to the starter contact. They're very short. I could almost, if we can see it, it won't focus, there it goes. You could almost use a direct metal strap there, but I decided to make up a little cable just for the practice. And this is the main battery lead I've got. This is nice thick copper cable, and I'm using proper lugs and things. And the way that you crimp these on is with one of these cheap crimping tools. These are really reasonably priced, and if you look at the crimps, they've all got numbers on them, and the numbers correspond to the size of the crimp and the size of the wire. And these sets come with these little jaws, and these jaws are all numbered, and the numbers match the crimps. So these are 35 crimps, and I've got the 35 jaws in there. And this is just like a little hydraulic crimping tool. So it puts the exact right amount of pressure on these things to get a really nice strong crimp. If this is all done properly, you don't need to solder these. In fact, there's a school of thought that you should never solder crimped connections. In the past, for smaller ones, I do sometimes solder them after I've crimped them, but you should never solder them before you crimp them, because the solder is soft and it creeps over time. And so if you solder the wires, tin the wires, and then crimp things, over time they'll come loose. The crimps will come loose. So a proper crimp like this actually does what's called a mechanical weld inside there. So that's the best sort of connection you can get. Also, if you solder the connections, what happens is the solder will wick up through capillary action up inside the insulation, and you'll get a hard spot, and the wire is quite likely to break at the join there. So I just go with the crimping now. But you do need the correct crimping tools to do it properly, to do it nicely. Same with the smaller crimps. It's really worthwhile having a decent set of the proper crimping tools. And then just to give it a bit of insulation, I use a little piece of heat shrink, and this is dual wall. I've just lost it. There it is. This is what's called dual wall heat shrink, and it's got glue on the inside as well, so it sort of nicely seals everything. And one trick with heat shrink, because it looks too modern in a vintage car, is it's always got this modern lettering on it. You can simply rub that off, a bit of isopropyl alcohol in a cloth, and you can rub that off, and it'll just be a black sleeve. So I'm going to go and I'll heat shrink this on, and then I should be able to bolt this on permanently. Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening rather. You can tell because it's dark outside. I've actually got the most of the week off because my parents are coming down to visit. So I've taken off most of the days this week to catch up with them, show them around. They've never been here, so they've never seen the place. They've just seen the YouTube films. So that'll be good to show them around, and they can see what we're doing, all the things I'm building, how we're set up here. But I might finish this film today so it doesn't get too long. The bike, I've actually attached the fuel tank and that's full of fuel. There don't seem to be any leaks. It starts up fine, runs fine. I still think the clutch is sticking, but I'll know more about that when I can actually try riding it. The wheels are still just sitting on the bearings. I'm obviously waiting for the dust shields, the oil seals. Probably don't really need them because they're sealed bearings, but it's not going to hurt, and you need them there to take up the space anyway. The front, I cleaned up and painted the front brake bracket. That's this piece, and I'm still not sure if I'm missing another piece that goes across here or if the mudguards just fit straight to this. They can definitely just screw straight to that. I'm not sure which way round they go, if the brackets go on the inside or the outside. And looking at pictures online, it's actually a bit hard to tell. It seems to fit better with them on the inside, but I'm guessing it makes more sense if they're on the outside because it keeps them cleaner. So I need to find some more period photos. The manuals I've got don't really have good enough photos to really be able to tell. But that's almost done now. There's not much more to do on it. I did look up some pictures of what the inside of the dynamo looks like. There are separate coils. There's 3 separate coils inside there. So one day when I take that apart, pull the flywheel off and have a look in there, I suspect the coil that drives the lights, the lamps, is burned out. And it looks like it's easy enough to rewind those. You just sort of measure the wire and you figure out how many turns there are, and you can actually rewind them yourself. But the bike's looking good. I also did order the missing side cover. So those are fiberglass reproductions. I figured that was easier than trying to make my own. I probably could, but I've got more than enough things to do already. So I think it worked out to be about $150. When that arrives, I will paint both of those that same green colour and clear coat them because I've still got some of that clear coat in the can. Be good to see if it still works. And it should be the bike done, actually. What else have we done today? So this is the other advantage of having a beer fridge in the shed is beer boxes. So you can see I've made a template for the seat back out of lots of bits of beer box hot glued together. That actually worked pretty well because there's no easy way to actually create that, to trace around that. So I started off with the boxes up against the back of this and traced around it that way. So cut out the pieces, hot glue them all together, and then trimmed it, marked around the inside and trimmed it. So that gives me a template for the seat back, which is good because that now shows me where I need to put in rails at the bottom here. I think there's a couple of pieces of timber that get screwed to that, which is what the bottom of the seat kind of drops into to stop that moving around. You can start seeing now where I'm going to need plates or blocks on the back of this for the seat back to push up against. They will need to be really strong because, of course, if you're braking heavily, you're pushing back on that, so you don't want that to go anywhere. You can also see this is a front guard. I've just got it sitting on the back to give me some idea, but if you imagine this curving around the wheel a bit tighter, the front mount for the guards will be straight through there. I need to look at some side-on pictures of period cars to figure out what angle the guards actually follow, how much of the wheel they actually cover. The top one and the front one should be straight. The back one, because of where I've got my my hoop there may need a little bend in it, so that one will probably have a little bit of a dog leg in it, but that should be fine. That also actually gives you a good place to mount lights, the rear lamps, so they can either go on here or on that guard stay. Probably on the chassis is better, it's going to be far more rigid. An interesting thing about this is going to be where the number plates fit when I actually get it on the road, assuming I can get it on the road. I'm hoping I can. Interestingly, today I was watching a, what do they call it on YouTube, premiere, Shed by the Tracks. Just so happens that the times that he does them are actually sensible times for me. Normally things like that are all at sort of sparrow fart in the morning or really late at night, so I don't get to see them. But this one turned out to be at 12:30 during the day today, so I was able to actually watch that and participate in that, which was good. And he was talking about number plates as well. So modern in New Zealand, the standard number plates look like that. They used to be black with silver, and then they moved to that white with black, which just looks kind of horrible. I've actually got an original one here, or an old one. That's what they used to look like. That's a dead plate. I don't know what that's off. I just picked that up somewhere along the line. So that's what they used to look like. You can get personalized plates. The plate on the MG is actually a personalized plate, but it's actually one of the sequence of numbers that would come up anyway. And they now do personalized plates that are black background with silver, like those original plates. And you can also get them slightly smaller. They make a slightly smaller version, and I think that's what I'll get for this car when I actually get it registered and on the road. There's nothing stopping me buying the plate now. You can buy the plates even if you don't have a vehicle to put on them, but I think I'll wait. So front plate is easy enough. You can see there's actually a hole all the way through here. There's a bar that goes through there, and I can sort of hang the plate on that. Then it's out of the way of everything. But the rear is a problem. So in New Zealand, you're not allowed cut out lettering. Well, you never used to be allowed it. Maybe they changed it. I'm pretty sure they haven't. You actually have to have a plate. And I don't know what the rules say exactly about which side the plate has to be visible on, because obviously on a car like this, it's a bit tricky knowing where to mount it. You can't mount it under the tail because it's not visible except from a long way away. It'll have to go on one side, which means it's not visible from the other side. So I don't know quite how that works. Obviously you could mount it up on the top here, but you don't really want to. Although, interestingly, that's how Austin 7 Speedies, I think it is, did it from the factory. There was actually a board mounted across here with the lamps either end and the number plate in the middle. On my Austin 7, I was able to fit it pretty close to the end of the tail. So that's where the plate would go, and this is sized for a normal size New Zealand number plate. You also have to have it illuminated, so there's a lamp there. But yeah, the Brooklands is going to be interesting because it has got such a long pointy tail. So that'll be something to look at. First problem is actually getting it on the road, of course. But that kind of makes sense. I did fit, somebody pointed out to me, I'd forgotten the rebound strap on the bottom, so it's probably a bit hard to see, but I've added another piece of rubber. It's actually bolted to the same U-hoop rather than to the chassis. I need to do something similar on the front because there's no bump stop whatsoever. You can see there's not a lot of room there either. So these front springs barely move, which is by design. The springs are meant to be really stiff and the chassis quite supple. What I'm going to do is I'll just put a couple of holes in the chassis rail here and here and bolt a rubber strip underneath there, but I can't do that until I take the chassis apart. Take everything apart to do the under tray and paint the chassis and that kind of thing. The other thing I had to do was buy a new tool. Everything's rather precariously balanced, as you can see. This is a battery tie down. That'll go down behind there somewhere. But I had to get this, which is a little right angle drill attachment. And the reason I needed this is because after I made my brackets, I realized to drill the holes, to bolt it through, I need to drill through there. And my drills are all too long to be able to do that. So this should let me drill through that way. This side isn't too bad because the opening's so big, but through there. And then I can bolt those brackets all the way through. But that gives you an idea of the seat back. Obviously you need that cutout in the middle because of the torque tube going up and down. When I was figuring out the guard stays, it did occur to me that means I'm going to have to make the brackets, make sure they're out of the way of the skin, and then after I skin it, I'll have to drill the holes so that you can get the tube into the brackets. And I did think, well, they're going to let water in. And then I realized that this car is going to be impossible to keep clean or keep dry. Just the nature of it, you know, having an axle that goes up and down that's inside the rear of the tail. There's no way you can close that off. They didn't have anything to close it off in period. It's just open like that. So I imagine the tail fills up with rubbish. I'll have to have some strategically placed drain holes, I think. It'll be interesting to see how that works. I guess some people never take them out in the weather, but I even in my MGB, I tend to drive it in the rain with the top down for as long as I possibly can. I don't mind getting wet in cars like this. That's what they're for. That's how it was back in the day. You just sort of dressed appropriately. The only other thing worth mentioning, I can show my starter solenoid wired up. I did buy a new horn button to go on the end there. I actually have an original. So if we look at this, this is an original one, but it's in pretty bad shape. So the idea was always to try and repair this, but the plastic just gets so brittle and crusty. You know, it's not easy to repair that. And they do make modern reproductions. So that's the horn button, and that basically goes in the middle there. So it sits out quite a long way, but that's for the horn. So that should be on the way from the UK. Back there. And then I have to keep remembering I've got this sticking out, so not to walk into it. There's my little link between the starter motor and the starter solenoid. You can just sort of see it down in there. That's all up nicely out of the way. When the firewall's in place somewhere here, you can just get your finger in to start the engine from there. These terminals, one is I think the battery feed will come in on a big lug, and then you've got the two terminals there that you can use as power takeoffs to the rest of the wiring loom. This one here, might need to move that a little bit. That one there is for the actual starter connection, so that'll go to the push button. But yeah, it's starting to fill in the gaps a little bit, I think. This is just a small thing These are wheel centre caps. So these are new ones from the Riley Register spares. They actually go in the centre of the wheels like that. Normally the backs of them are sort of swaged out into here, but I think I'll just use some non-acid silicone type sealant to hold those in, just so they're able to be removed if really necessary. But when you buy them new, they come like this. They come all shiny. And obviously I don't want a shiny car. These almost look fake. So I'm just sort of dulling these down with a red Scotch-Brite. And what I'll actually do is I'll just leave them sitting for a while and sort of rub my greasy hands over the top of them, because they won't stay shiny like that. They'll quickly tarnish down. Well, I'm hoping they quickly tarnish down. Pretty sure they're just polished. There's no sort of coating on there. I tried various solvents to make sure nothing would come off them, and they are actually brass. They're not just plated steel. So it's just sort of a little detail, but I don't want it looking new and shiny like this. I'd rather make it look like it's used and it's been scratched and it's been wiped down over the years, which is what's going to happen to it. That's how I'll look after it. I'll just wipe it down and not try to keep it all polished and shiny. Another small thing to add, I've been looking at what coolant I'm going to run now that I've almost finished the cooling system in the Riley, and also for the Austin 7. So in the past I've used Fernox, which is a central heating solution that's used a lot in the UK. You can get it here. I remember it was really hard for me to find it, and it was quite expensive. And it turns out now it's even harder to get and even more expensive. I think it was up to $400 or something silly to get some, if they even actually stock it. So it should work. A lot of people use it. A lot of people swear by it in the UK. Apparently the company doesn't technically endorse it because it isn't meant for cars. But I decided to look around for a proper alternative and something that's available locally. And what I came up with was this Penrite classic car coolant. It's got a picture of a Vauxhall on the front, so it must be good for pre-war cars. And apparently that's what this stuff is for. So it won't upset anything in the cooling system. It handles the different dissimilar metals and that kind of thing. It won't affect rubbers, that kind of stuff. So this is not really antifreeze. Apparently what you can do is, if you want actual antifreeze, you can mix this with propylene glycol. And what you do with this stuff is, if you don't need antifreeze, you can just mix it, I think it says 10 to 15% with demineralized water, and that should be good in the cooling system. So I'm going to try this in the Austin 7 as well, but I want to run a flush through it first to make sure whatever was in there is out of there. I'll probably do the same on the Riley, just because even though I haven't run the engine for long, it was definitely a little silty, the coolant that came out of there. I don't think that's anything to worry about. I think it was just that it's been flushing out what's been in there for years. But obviously this is a brand new radiator, brand new water pump, new hoses, new fittings everywhere. So I want it as clean as possible. Once I've finished messing around with the guards, I will fit that bottom hose, and then I can actually try refilling the cooling system. But yeah, there's lots of little tiny details with a car like this. All sorts of little bits and pieces you have to think about. I'm still trying to figure out the wiring. I think now that I've got that sorted out, I have it pretty clear in my head that the electrical connections will all run down this side. There aren't very many to the back, obviously. It's just the lamps, really. So tail lights, stop lights, and number plate lamp. So that's only really 2 connections, or 2 wires and a return. The battery switch down there, I think I will end up putting another sort of cross member thing that goes across here, and the switch will probably be mounted in the front of that, so it's kind of above the under tray but underneath the front seat, if that makes sense. I'm still figuring out exactly where the seats go. The seats are quite long. I think the front of the seats come to here somewhere. They're quite long seats. I did try sitting in this with the back in place, and I can just reach all the pedals and things and get in and out of the car, which is handy. When I do the floor at the front, it gets very tight in here around the pedal area, and I think what I'm going to do is the floor will actually have to have heel troughs in it, sort of one here for the accelerated brake and one over this side for the clutch, with a sort of piece in the middle which is for the brake linkage, the foot brake linkage in the middle there. That's the stabilizing rod. So that's because you can see here, this one down the bottom here is the actual linkage for the brakes, but because it sticks out so far, you've got this here to help stabilize everything, and that needs to be straight. I mean, if you tried to bend this, it would be springy. It wouldn't be under tension, so it has to be a straight line. Another one of those little details. What else? I don't know if I mentioned earlier. So I did take my little magneto thing and put it in a little plastic box, which I labeled because over the years I've made many different little plastic boxes containing electronic gadgets. So it's quite handy to know what they all do. But the other thing you can get, pull it out, is on AliExpress you can get these little devices, and this is, if I turn it on, an LC meter. So it measures capacitance and it measures inductance, and when you're setting up points, it's the inductance that you're looking at. So the change in inductance is quite small, but you can also use this across the points, and you can see the inductance range change on here when the points are open and closed. Like I say, I've done electronics for years and years and years, and I don't know why I've only just thought about getting one of these, because I've got all sorts of electronic components, and sometimes it's just handy to be able to quickly measure them to see what they are, what the values are. So why I haven't bought one of these sooner, I don't know. And this was dirt cheap from China, of course. I'm just running it off a 18650 power bank cell thing. So that's another handy little tool. I've been assembling my toolkit. I need to get a better 3/8 drive that doesn't look quite so modern, but I cleaned out my little oil grease gun. Oh, that was another thing. These are the little rubber washers that I'm actually going to use to mount the frame to the body. So it's going to sit on top of these, and that just provides a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of an air gap. So those should be good. And I dug out my old, something I obviously picked up from an army surplus store at some point, but that makes quite a good tool bag that can go in the car, because again, obviously it's not a big car, so there's not a lot of space for things. So you want things like this that you can sort of clip to the inside of the car and provide you with storage for bits and pieces. You can get a little bit of storage under the seats as well, so it may be that can sit under the seat. I'm not really sure. It's definitely all coming together. Another small detail. As I say, building these cars is all about these small details. I think I mentioned these guards before, that they were modified, but the front part of them is actually original. So one of the really important measurements the guard gives me is the radius. So I can sort of roughly measure from the center of the wheel to that line on the guard, and I can see that's about 16 inches. All the way around, maybe 16 and a half. It's a bit hard, I've got it all just temporarily set up, so yeah, probably about 16 and a half. All the way around till about here, which is where the pie slicing starts, and it's gone wonky. They didn't keep the right radius. And what that gives me is the height of the guard above the tyre, because if I know this radius, and I know the radius of the tyre, which is, let's see, again, it's hard to measure, especially if I don't point the camera at it. So that's 14 inches there. So 28-inch diameter. To that line there. So if that's 14 to the outside of the tyre, well, it's very tricky. And the top of the guard is about 17. So that gives about 3 inches of travel, and there isn't 3 inches of travel on this. So the guards can be quite close to the tyres on this, because obviously the guard is attached to the chassis, but the wheel is attached to the suspension and it's going up and down. So you can get the front guards nice and tight to the tyre, which is good. So, you know, something like that will look about right. That's just another one of those sort of important details that original parts give you. So if I didn't have those, I would be making these blind. I would have to go by pictures and photographs online, and they're all different, and you don't know what's original, what's been remade, what's been made correctly. Of course, the best photos are period photos, but a lot of these cars were raced, and when they raced, they took the guards off. So you don't see a lot of them racing with guards on unless they were kind of road races. I think they had them on for those. But it's just another one of those little details where original parts are so valuable because they give you all of those measurements, those dimensions.